I did a couple of TikToks over the weekend talking about. I was listening to the latest podcast episode called The Focus Group, weekly podcast from Sarah Longwell of The Bulwark. And one of the voters that participated in last week's episode, they were talking about the big, beautiful bill. And she is a woman who is profoundly disabled. She gets Medicaid benefits, she gets disability, she gets SNAP benefits. She voted for Donald Trump. And under this big, beautiful bill, virtually all of the benefits that she receives for herself and her two kids are going to be defunded. And she said that she voted for Donald Trump because she liked the things that he was doing to take medical care away from trans kids. And I was like, if that's not the most American 2025 Trump voter, I don't know what is. Destroying her entire existence by voting for someone because she likes what they do to trans kids negatively. And we got a Supreme Court decision today upholding the state of Tennessee had passed legislation banning medical care for transgender youth. And when you have legislation like this, which deals with a classification of people based on race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, typically that requires the highest level of scrutiny from the Supreme Court. Strict scrutiny. The lowest level of review from the Supreme Court is called rational basis. And essentially what the Supreme Court said today is that transgender people do not qualify as a suspect class, and therefore this legislation was not subject to strict scrutiny review. It was subject to rational basis. And rational basis just means a state is passing a law that you can make some rational argument that what the state is legislating is a legitimate concern for the state. And people here were like, hey, it's medical care for kids. That's the rational basis. And it passed on a 6-3 vote. It comes in the middle of Pride Month, you know. So this is going to allow, Leah Litman, a Michigan law professor, said the following: in addition to concluding that this law does not discriminate on the basis of sex to trigger that strict scrutiny for that reason, the court also said that a law restricting gender-affirming care and treatment for gender dysphoria does not discriminate on the basis of gender identity, does not discriminate against trans individuals as trans individuals. She was very alarmed by this decision and by the statute. We're getting a lot of other reactions as well. One of my absolute favorite legal commentators, Elie Mystal, Mystal, wrote his own paraphrase of the concurrence to this opinion by Justice Sam Alito by writing, "The court says that Tennessee does not discriminate against trans kids. I think it does. But the most important point is, I do not care that it does, and neither should you. Fuck them kids, I say." And he added, all you liberals humping Amy Coney Barrett recently should check out her concurrence in this case, where she explains why transgender people are not a suspect class and are therefore not entitled to the heightened constitutional provisions of strict scrutiny and can generally go fuck themselves. Ryan Cooper, managing editor at the American Prospect, called the ruling the Plessy v. Ferguson for transgender people, adding, this court wants everyone but straight cisgendered people back in the closet or ideally dead. Another commentator noted that there was a prior landmark case, Scrutiny, that just repackaged every race is punished equally, so nothing to see here logic that the Loving v. Virginia case emphatically designed. The Loving case struck down a law preventing black and white people from marrying each other. Justice Clarence Thomas has a white wife, and I have very little doubt that he would be more than willing to overturn the Loving decision. Columbia law professor Jamal Greene remarked, I am inclined to be very deferential to state regulation of medical procedures for minors, but to apply rational basis review, the lowest review here is, to my mind, an abdication of the court's responsibility to the people harmed by this law. The clear message is you don't count. So the majority of this Supreme Court doesn't believe transgenderism is real, doesn't believe transgender kids are a thing, and doesn't believe that transgender people, adult or minor, deserve any protection under the law at all, and voted today accordingly. And Amy Coney Barrett emphatically came down on the side of the majority, as did Sam Alito in their concurrences. And yes, we've gotten some surprises out of Amy Coney Barrett lately. You know, I don't know if all 6 members of the current majority are Catholic and went to private Catholic schools, but at least 5 of them are. And we're letting them make decisions. We're letting them issue court decisions that restrict the ability of parents all across the United States to make medical decisions for their minor children based on bigotry and bullshit religious dogma, and manipulating the law in order to do it by saying they're not a suspect class, so they don't get the heightened level of scrutiny for this law. Transgender people are not a thing. So since they're not a thing, they're not a suspect class. And since they're not a suspect class, then it's just the question is, does the state have an interest in regulating medical care for children, not trans kids? Because trans kids are not real. And if they're not real, then they don't get suspect class status and the protections afforded by the Constitution to suspect classes. That's what our Supreme Court said today during Pride Month. And I saw another thing, was either on TikTok or Facebook or something, that, you know, Trump voters, evangelical voters will vote to raise their taxes, will vote to raise their prices, will vote to raise their interest rates on their mortgages, will vote to do away with or nearly eradicate Social Security. They'll vote to nearly eradicate Medicare. They'll vote to nearly eradicate Medicaid so that fewer than a dozen trans athletes can play sports in the NCAA. Because there are 520,000 NCAA athletes and fewer than a dozen identify as trans. It is hate and fear. Hate and fear. And the official policy, I did a TikTok the other day where I said the 14 words is now the official domestic policy of the Trump administration. The 14 words comes out of a white supremacist group called The Order by a guy named David Eden Lane in the 80s. And the 14 words are, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. I would amend that slightly to read, we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children unless they are poor, sick, or trans. That's the entire governing identity, the entire governing policy of the Trump administration. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children unless they are poor, sick, or trans.